there are tragedies in most people's lives, and sometimes those tragedies can end someone's life, and that's what happened with Marilyn Monroe. But I think that with women, especially women who die before their time, they don't live to be old, there's this tendency, this very vulgar sort of tendency to focus on the end and to sensationalize the end, and there's a lot of voyeurism and things like that. And so that's also, and almost like the higher, the higher the climb, the bigger the fall, that sort of thing. It's almost like a sick delight that I think people still take in seeing these certain kinds of tragedies happen to women, particularly when they can sort of blame, oh, it's her fault that she did this, or look, she was such a mess, or she was too messy, this is why this happened. And so that's another reason why I really wanted to focus on this year that she had in New York.
We're having a heat wave, a tropical heat wave. The temperature's rising, it isn't surprising, it certainly can.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I am so excited to be joined with Elizabeth Winder, who not only is the author of Marilyn in Manhattan, Her Year of Joy from 2017, which we're going to deep dive with her, but she also is the author of Pain, Parties, Work, Sylvia Plath in New York, Summer 1953. Her work has appeared in the Chicago Review, the Antioch Review, American Letters and Commentary, and she graduated from College of William and Mary and earned an MFA in creative writing from George Mason University. So first, welcome Elizabeth to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
Hello.
And I'm also joined with my co-host, Mary. So hi, Mary. It's nice for you to be here.
Hello.
So I think right away, Mary and I were talking about in preparation for your appearance here, Elizabeth, that, Mary is a fictional writer. I am an academic mostly. I write poetry sometimes, but mostly a scholarly writer. And we were just saying how a biographer kind of has to embrace both of those molds, like has to blend those genres together. So,
yes.
I mean, yeah, Mary, I'll let you ask the award-winning question.
Well, yeah, I'm sure every autobiographer and nonfiction writer has their own process, but what is your specific process when you are starting a new biography?
Wow. Okay. So my process might sound a little chaotic to a lot of people. Maybe especially to other biographers. Because, I actually went to graduate school for poetry, and so for a very long time, I wasn't even used to writing incomplete sentences. I'm very image driven in terms of like visual. I'm a visual sort of writer. So usually what happens is I start from looking at a lot of pictures, a lot of photographs, a lot of images. And luckily we live in this age of the internet so that everything is just a click away. And that's how I started this one. That's actually how the idea of this book, Marilyn in Manhattan, was born. Would have never thought to write about Marilyn Monroe had I not seen certain pictures of her that kind of struck my imagination. So my process always starts with like visual evidence,
Yeah.
What is your research process like?
The research process, let me think back to how I did the Marilyn book. Again, this may sound crazy, but I started with pictures. I printed out like maybe 2,000 photographs of Marilyn Monroe that I found online that were from the specific timeline that I cover, which starts at the end of 1954 through the beginning of 1956. And I would do things like I would print out like 30 pictures of the same party that she went to and kind of piece it together to see like what exactly happened during this party? Because when you're writing a microbiography, I want to be able to really put the reader there in the way that like you're present when you watch a movie or something, like you're there while things actually happen. You're almost seeing it in real time. And so I wanted to write this biography that way. So then I put all the pictures in an order in these two big notebooks. And then I did my research around it. And I like to handwrite everything first. So I was handwriting notes and beginnings of sentences, kind of like all in this chronological order that was sort of guided by these images, because I'm somebody who just like I need images to anchor me. So that was my beginning. And Marilyn Monroe is obviously someone where it's not hard to find information about her. And then another really, really big, important part of the research for this book was later on in the process, I went to the special archives of, gosh, I feel like it's been so long because I worked on things since then, but the archives of this library, a research library in Austin. And I looked specifically at the Norman Mailer archives because he had hours and hours of audio recording interviews with Marilyn's friend and colleague, Milton Greene, and his wife, Amy Greene. So I was in a room listening to those and writing a lot of, direct quotes down and things like that. So that was another really big part of it.
Yeah.
Was the research part.
Was it at the Harry Ransom Center?
That's it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you. That's it.
Yeah. So an image that we're greeted with right away, of course, is Marilyn leaning over in Manhattan, looking out at the skyscrapers. I'm just curious, when did you encounter what became the cover and such a powerful image of what's to come with Marilyn's energy in Manhattan?
I think I encountered this image before I started writing the book officially. And even before I think I wrote the first sentence of the book, I knew that I wanted this to be the cover. And this picture was taken in the spring of 1955 after she had settled in New York for a couple months. And I just think that image says everything on so many levels, because one, you have Marilyn Monroe not in a pinup outfit, not in some Hollywood awards show evening gown, not with a lot of makeup on. She's in a bathrobe on a hotel balcony, looking out into Manhattan amongst all the skyscrapers. This is a very different image of her than I think a lot of people are used to. And then I think that this image is just, it really, it has so much hope in it. And I look at it and I see immediately like a woman who feels empowered and capable of reinventing herself and kind of like breaking free in a way. So that's, I really, that image was kind of in my mind the whole time as I was writing this book.
Yeah. Do you know what hotel she was at when this photo was taken?
When this photo was taken, it was this photo shoot was at the Ambassador Hotel. It was not the hotel that she was staying. She had a few different places of residence that year in New York. And this one, the Ambassador, was just used for this photo shoot.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned right at the beginning of your biography, I was so captivated by the preface of just what her life was, how it almost in a way, this crumbling in Hollywood and the pressure she felt and almost just being passed around the 20th century Fox studio industry. Yes. And like, you really do make this claim that I completely agree with, that Manhattan becomes for her this lifeline to find her authenticity away from that pressure and that publicity and her image on the, movie screen. So like maybe how did you find trying to separate these different identities Marilyn Monroe was living, like from the Hollywood element into then her more organic nature of when she eventually starts at the actor's studio?
Okay. I really believe, and I still believe this, that Marilyn Monroe would have died. She died very young, but I think that she would have died even younger had she stayed in Hollywood and not made that move to Manhattan. I think that, and that you mentioned in the beginning of my book, the preface, and I'm so glad that you liked it, because I didn't know if that was a good way to start. So I'm glad that you liked it. You really get the sense, I was trying to create this very immediate sense that she was kind of sneaking away and escaping. And she was running away from her life. And people do that sometimes, and I think that in this case, it would have been impossible for her to not only to grow as a person, but to even survive had she stayed in Los Angeles. People could even argue that she was in a trap of her own making, in a way, because she did in the beginning of her career, really lean into that bombshell look. But at the same time, you have to realize that was the only option for women. And at that time, women in Hollywood. And I imagine that there were many, many other Hollywood actors who felt, maybe to a lesser degree, but in a similar way that Marilyn felt, who felt trapped, especially women actors, because the studio system was, the studios ruled supreme at that time, and they really owned the actors. I mean, completely. So I was really trying to communicate just how that really constricting sense of feeling trapped, because I think that all of us have felt that at some point in our lives. And, then when it goes on, you just kind of get that feeling in your chest, like, I can't break free, I can't move. And that's how Marilyn felt by 1954. She was pretty much at the peak of her career. You would think all these wonderful things had happened, but that's absolutely how she felt in Hollywood. Does that answer?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I really like that your novel really presses upon that, the idea that the studios owned you as an actor and you were going to play the parts that they gave you. Because before I read this, I was thinking, like, you had Greta Garbo, you had the Hepburns, and like these actors who were considered to be more serious actors.
Yeah.
And then you had Marilyn Monroe, who was always playing this blonde bimbo. And you're like, why was she never given the chance to play anything more serious? And it is like you said, because the studios decided what you were going to play, and therefore they decided if you were going to be a serious actor or if you were going to play these types of parts.
Right. And I think that so much of that, they decided for you, and they decided right away. And once they decided, that was it. You had a label on you. You had to, maybe you did comedy plus bombshell roles, or you were more serious. And so much of that was determined by how you looked. Marilyn, it was so surface level, because when you look at someone like Marilyn Monroe, it was based on, the fact that she had that traditional heterosexual sex appeal, maybe, like her body, whether it was her body proportions, her voice, her face, she was just labeled very, very quickly as not serious. And at first, that she was just excited to act, because when you get into your dream career, you're just excited to be doing anything at first. And then I think after a while, she realized, no, I want more. And then on top of that, it wasn't just being restricted to these roles that she was getting really, really sick of. It was also not being treated as a human being in a way. I mean, when I mentioned in the book, the studio system, like, you had to, it didn't matter how big of a star you were on set, you had to ask to go to the bathroom. You had to ask, you asked permission to go on a date with somebody, like during your personal time. And it was almost like indentured servitude. It was really, really restrictive.
Yeah, well, and someone else who you mention in your book is Judy Garland. And like Judy Garland had so much come out from scholarship and biographers about when she was in Wizard of Oz, like she could only eat a certain kind of
Yes.
food. And you talk about Marilyn Monroe, like it'll stick out to me, like this concoction of
The
and remind me,
gelatin
it's like
and the
yeah,
egg yolks, and then a little bit of liver.
Mhm. Yeah, and she could only have tomato juice, or it was this whole kind of juicing
Right.
diet. And
Right.
but
Juice
then there,
mixed with raw protein and stuff.
yeah, but then
Crazy
there's also
concoctions.
like the connection between Marilyn and Judy is that they got involved with the studio making them start to take pills to sleep,
Yes.
and the
Yes.
barbiturates that really
Absolutely.
created an addiction that wasn't known about how harmful this was to them.
Right. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because I also see so many similarities between Marilyn Monroe and Judy Garland. Of course, they are different women, but there's that vulnerability there. And then you're right about the pharmaceuticals, and that the studio system was pushing on all their actors very liberally, because for example, like Marilyn, like many people, struggled with insomnia. And then you have these early call times. So an easy solution, the studio, the directors, they didn't want her showing up to work, with circles under her eyes, just give her a pill. And also what might not be very well known is that Marilyn Monroe struggled with endometriosis. And even today, many women with endometriosis, it's so underdiagnosed that at the time she didn't even really know that she had it. So the studio system was then pushing more painkillers on her. And also, to be fair, the danger of those drugs was not really known at that time.
Yeah. And I do want to say, like, I know Mary said your book is a novel, and this isn't to like critique Mary in the moment, but
I know.
but
as soon as I said that, I was
no,
like,
but I
wrong.
think it's actually a really important, powerful moment of slippage, because it's exactly why I'm gravitating. And your biography, your book, Elizabeth, is so stunningly the prose. It's one of and I'm not just saying this because you're here, but it's just such this page turner of capturing the dialogue, really telling the story that moves, that doesn't feel like you're just engaging in controversy or conspiracy. And I know that's really tough with Marilyn. So like, can you talk about that? Like, what did you think of all the conspiracies that exist about Marilyn's life? Like,
well, first, thank you so much for saying those things about my book. And Mary, I'm actually so flattered that you called it a novel, because that's exactly what I wanted to read like. I mean, I think that prose should be as engaging as poetry, and I also think that nonfiction should be as engaging as fiction. So a lot of the way I taught myself to write nonfiction was by really kind of studying fiction that I liked, in terms of like how it was structured and all of those wonderful things. Wait, then I forgot your question.
No. I was just going to ask, like, how did you, because don't want us to go to what immediately is thought of with Marilyn, which is the death. Like, so, right.
Yes.
And your book counters that with her time in Manhattan. So to start with that, like, what did you find was maybe the most difficult, or what was challenging to kind of counter that history when you're looking at her period in Manhattan?
Well, I mean, what you had mentioned earlier about like, Marilyn being sort of surrounded by controversy, conspiracy theories. I mean, that's absolutely true, because I feel like more than half the people that I encountered, oh, you're writing a book about Marilyn Monroe, is this about JFK? Like that's, and I was just thinking, what? But so many, and then it dawned on me, oh my God, this is what I'm up against, or any person writing about Marilyn who wants to show this other side of her is up against. And and that gave me even more motivation to really focus on this time period, because I was trying, I really wanted to, this was such a special year in her life. And I feel like it was one of the only times that she really felt free to be herself and to pursue the goals and the interests and the friendships and the relationships that she wanted to pursue. So not only just as a writer, I feel like it's so important to me to bring all kinds of details into relief, to high relief, to make things more immediate. I thought the stronger that I could make those details, the more it would resonate with people, and it would bring this Marilyn to life. What I see is the real Marilyn, to sort of counter these other static images that we have of her that have been kind of thrown at us for over half a century. Does that make any sense?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Because she's definitely seen, at least from my experience, she's definitely seen as almost like this very tragic character in her own story, which is like, weird to me. But, because you hear about her early days in her house, she was abused and in an orphanage, and then she becomes this starlet, and people kind of think like, oh, like you became a starlet, so like that's it. Why were you depressed? Why were you going through all of these different issues? You got what you wanted. But to step back and say, wait a minute, she's not just this character she's played over and over and over for you again on the screen. There's an actual person there who, tragedy aside, is a human being that is very worth exploring, which you did so beautifully. And I love seeing this version of Marilyn instead of her being so tragic.
Thank you. I think that with women I think that our society has this tendency to focus. There are tragedies in most people's lives, and sometimes those tragedies can end someone's life, and that's what happened with Marilyn Monroe. But I think that with women, especially women who die before their time, they don't live to be old, there's this tendency, this very vulgar sort of tendency to focus on the end and to sensationalize the end, and there's a lot of voyeurism and things like that. And so that's also, and almost like the higher, the higher the climb, the bigger the fall, that sort of thing. It's almost like a sick delight that I think people still take in seeing these certain kinds of tragedies happen to women, particularly when they can sort of blame, oh, it's her fault that she did this, or look, she was such a mess, or she was too messy, this is why this happened. And so that's another reason why I really wanted to focus on this year that she had in New York. And it's not that, and obviously in the book, you'll find that it's not that Marilyn Monroe, I'm trying to come up with build this counter argument that she never drank too much, or she never abused pills, or she never had messy relationships. Of course she did all those things. So many people do all these things. So many men do all these things too, and nobody seems to say anything about that, by the way. And yet she was still a completely dynamic, fully rounded human being who was really pursuing like serious goals here and taking big risks.
Yeah, well, and I think that that's such an important element, because like even throughout your book, you do, as a biographer, right, you still make mention of what happens before. Like I will always remember your description of her like driving to LAX, and she's kind of has maybe a shawl, or has like a wig on, and she's trying to really escape the public eye. And then eventually when she lands in Manhattan, she kind of lets go of that. And, like you said, the cover of your book, she does not have caked on makeup, and like has more of that Milton Greene, the photographer, that idea that he really got to know about her. And, I really appreciate how much you speak to Milton Greene and that friendship. And
oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah. So like, how did what was your research like to really get to the bottom of her connection to Milton?
Well, that was Marilyn's friendship with Milton Greene is such a big part of this book, obviously. And it's so, their friendship is so endlessly touching and fascinating to me, because the more I read about it, especially in my research when I was in the Norman Mailer archives at the Harry Ransom Center, I was so I was just so captivated by their friendship, because it was so special. And it was really a friendship between two very imaginative, vulnerable people who were both artists, who were both kind of, shy and skittish around people, but who really trusted each other. And they had this wonderful, like playful dynamic. And when you see, I love the pictures of them together, when you see them working together, like working on Marilyn Monroe productions, when you see them in a little office with phones and notebooks surrounded by pictures, being busy together. It's just like, I look at that and I know what that feeling is like. When you meet somebody who you can collaborate with, who shares your vision, who you just feel seen by, it's such a special thing. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on it. And it made me upset that the general scholarship surrounding Marilyn Monroe focuses so much on her relationships with these other men that, maybe through no fault of their own, maybe not, really kind of dulled down her creativity and her capacity to advocate for herself and create and do all of those things that she wanted to do. Whereas like Milton Greene, it was like a wonderful spark between them.
Yeah. Well,
I also love the
wait.
relationship. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, just to follow up, because I do, what you've just said, Elizabeth, is a stereotype. Like I had to not break, but I've had to confront when I've talked about my real love for Marilyn Monroe's literary fascination. And I'm so glad you mentioned all of the books that she was reading, because I even had a professor of mine who said, "Oh, that's a picture of her with Ulysses. That was probably a PR stunt." And I'm like,
"Oh my God.
No. And I work on Whitman, so I know she had Leaves of Grass on her bedside table.
That was one of her favorite.
Yeah.
Books.
And there was a whole catalog list from her auction when the books, I'm sure you've seen it, but of her annotations. And I'm so glad, we can get more into it, but I'm so glad you counter the knowledge that she was not a literary person, because she was.
Isn't it crazy that people just assume, oh, that was staged? What do you, why would you even think that? It's incredible to me how people still have these very antiquated, regressive thoughts about conclusions about her personality in this day and age. But they do.
And it's sad to see that someone who was a sex symbol, it's like, you can only be good at that. Kind of going back to what we were talking about with the studio. It's like, okay, you can only be good at that thing. Like, what, you trying to be the hot chick and the smart girl? Like, sorry, you can only have
it doesn't work that way.
And it's like, no, because that's not how people are. We're not just
absolutely
one thing.
And it's almost like society these days, that they're still trying to do to Marilyn Monroe what the studio system did to her. You've got to pick, like, we've already picked this one for you. You don't get to do the rest. If you're caught doing it, you're just like a little kid pretending to read a serious book, or there's this, it's a very infantilizing kind of attitude.
Well, and unfortunately, someone who we're seeing with being treated, in my opinion, like that right now is Wendy Williams. And I have always admired Wendy Williams as a radio host, a TV host. Like, she knows what she's doing in pop culture. But yes, she's having mental health and a mixture of a dependency on some substance. But what saddens me is is she going to come back, or is she done? And I'm like, why don't you let her live try to figure her life out, and
absolutely
just, have the door open for her when hopefully she does come back.
Because in today, like you think, while on one level society's come so far, there are great things being done, breaking down the stigma for mental health issues, substance abuse, all different kinds of things. But then at the end, you see people forget all that, and they're turning someone's struggles into kind of a spectator, the media into kind of a spectator sport, commenting on it. It's almost like betting on a horse. Is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? And it's very sad, and it's dehumanizing, and it always seems to happen to women. Seem to be the victim of that sort of speculation a lot more than men do.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think we've seen things happen recently with men who have acted violently in Hollywood, and it's a different narrative that's spun. So,
yes,
they can come back easier from mistakes that are.
Oh, right. We've seen it happen a lot in the past few years. We're seeing it happen now. I think, it keeps happening.
Yeah. Oh, but even with Marilyn and her connection to Manhattan, I mean, you reminded me of that image that so many know, that of her and the subway grate, and that's in Manhattan, but that's for the 7-Year Itch, and it's kind of more of that PR image.
Right.
So what did you think about, I know you can't get into the psychology of you're not in Marilyn's head, but you must have definitely thought through, what was it like in those moments, you think, for Marilyn to have to perform in that way while also having her complexity of her mind?
I think that my opinion is that Marilyn, that whole night of the 7-Year Itch, that whole night during the premiere, and like I said, I look at photographs very, very closely. I think that she was very miserable that night.
Okay, hold on to that question, because we'll be right back. But first, a word from our sponsor.
This episode is brought to you by Snapple. Welcome to the Snapple Market Auditory Experience. Close your eyes. Imagine you're walking into your neighborhood store. You make your way to the back and reach for your favorite Snapple flavor. You can't wait. You take a sip. Whoa, that's a lot of flavor. What flavor are you holding? Now open your eyes and check out Snapple.com to find ridiculously flavorful Snapple near you.
Because if you look at pictures of her during the 7-Year Itch premiere, she has the heavy makeup on again. She has those heavy, heavy diamond jewelry. She didn't even really like wearing jewelry that much. She was somebody who really liked wearing just very simple clothes that she could move around in. And she looked very, very sad. She was on the arm of her ex-husband. I think this felt like a giant step back to her. And, she had already filmed the movie and everything, but this is not what she wanted to be known for. Even though her performance in that film was great, and absolutely something that she should have been proud of. And I hope that she was proud of it, but she was still, that was the middle of the year of 1955. It was June. I think it was on her 29th birthday that the premiere was. And she's felt, this life, obviously life isn't linear. You can be making progress, but then all of a sudden some things will happen and you're thinking, am I right back to where I started? And I think that's how she felt that moment during that publicity shoot, during the premiere. And with all of that wrapped up together, she was also getting a lot of pressure from Hollywood to say, Marilyn, stay in these roles. You do comedy and you do the bimbo stuff really, really well. Don't get in over your head. Come back to Hollywood. So that was not a fun experience for her, I think. And then to have to see the massive billboard of her, right in the middle of Manhattan, to have to pass it all the time. It's kind of like, I imagine that she was thinking, my image, my physical body is it's still not my own. It's still owned by these Hollywood men. So that's what I think was going on, possibly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I
also really like how you brought, or this this period and why it's discussed. And I also like the idea, or not the idea, but I like that it's mentioned that her and Milton were working on Marilyn Monroe productions, because I feel like not only was she leaving LA and trying to leave Hollywood behind, she was also not only trying to find herself, but then trying to forge, like you said, her own image. And I feel like her trying to create Marilyn Monroe Productions was her trying to be like, this is my body and it needs to be mine, and my image and my life and how I'm presented needs to be controlled by me and not by old dudes halfway across the country telling me.
Absolutely.
And I love that, because again, you see her as like, sometimes I feel like she's presented as almost helpless, and here she's like,
Yes.
yeah, I'm starting my own production company. What up? Like, you know, like very much like,
Yes. Yeah. That was a very bold move on her part, because she was getting she was getting threatening calls from lawyers, multiple. She and Milton were every single day. Where's Marilyn? She has to come back. She broke her contract. We're going to bury her. We're going to make her a joke, all of these things. And, you're absolutely right. Marilyn is seen as this helpless, cuddly little victim. But how many other women did that back then? How many other people did that back then? How many other actors had the guts to do that back then? And in one of the things that I love about Marilyn's friendship with Milton Greene is, it seems like whenever even when they were doing something really serious, it was kind of like two kids playing a game. There was like an element of that to it. And that's just something I love so much. And, to bring it back to the preface of my book, when she's wearing a wig, she's wearing a coat. Yeah, she did sort of have to sneak away, but they were sort of leaning into that and having a good time with it in a way. And I think that it's so cool that, even with all this pressure on them, because they were both risking a lot. Milton was risking a lot as well. They managed to be lighthearted about it and have a good time doing it. And they were both, and use their imaginations to kind of propel themselves during this really risky time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now this is probably going to be a tough question, but, we are up for, whatever happened in your process. Cause I'm just always curious when I listen to the interviews of Marilyn, from her close friends, or from other actors who were working with her. Like Lauren Bacall, I know I've heard a lot talk about Marilyn. Even Jane Russell, her co-star in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. So who do you think of her close friends really knew Marilyn? Like really knew about her intelligence, her understanding of herself, that she even knew she was playing this part for the capitalist system of Hollywood, like that.
Milton Greene absolutely would have been the one to know her the best. I absolutely think that no one on the planet knew Marilyn as well as Milton Greene did. I don't think anyone even came close. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but Marilyn was not. She was actually a sort of private person in a lot of ways. She was shy and she was fearful. She was skittish around people. It did take time for her to open up. It's not that she was guarded, really. She was just kind of frightened. So I think that some of her other friends, like the friends that you've mentioned and some others, they saw her intelligence, but they also really saw her vulnerability. So with a lot of interviews, and I don't know if you've picked up on this too, but I've noticed a real sort of, when people talk about Marilyn Monroe, the people who knew her, like friends from the Actors Studio, things like that, they talk about her in a very protective way, and with admiration, but also with that sense of protectiveness. Like, this is like a soft and vulnerable, wounded sort of creature, because she always kind of, with most people, like she sort of presented that way.
Yeah. Have you, it just came out on the eve of this recording, but have you seen the new Netflix, The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe, the
I have not seen it yet.
Okay.
Have you?
I did see it. Yeah.
And what did you think?
Well, I think that it gives more of an understanding of what you're saying about her close confidants. Especially there's a lot of discussion with the Kennedys, like a lot of those. Yeah. I mean, but at the same time, what I'm happy with is they still rely on a lot of Milton Greene connections.
Good.
There's a lot
I
of
love it when they focus on that. There's so much there.
Yeah, they focus a lot more on that than her ex-husbands. So I was excited about that. And when it comes to the Kennedys, it was more about her conflicted feelings of, like, there's a quote about her feeling like a rack of meat, or like that will stand out to me from that.
That actually does sound interesting to me. You know, when I was researching this book, it was like, I called it like a microbiography. Like the scope of it was relatively small. So I stayed within that scope. I did read a lot about her past, because of course the past informs what I'm talking about. I did not, of course I know about, you know, but my knowledge of Marilyn post 1956 is not nearly as, you know, it's not nearly as vast. So, you know, I've always thought, I wonder what it is that makes people so fascinated about her connection with the Kennedys. And I don't even, and it is interesting, but I can't really even think of why. I mean, why do you guys think that people are really interested in that or focused on that?
I personally think it's just the age-old sex sells. So it's like, was she sleeping with both of them? Was she only sleeping with the president? Was she only sleeping with his brother? Like, what was that relationship? Because obviously, you know, it was very scandalous. You know, JFK was married. You know, I'm not sure what Robert was doing, if he was married at the time, but
I think he was.
Okay. Yeah. I thought he was, but yeah. So, you know, you've got this huge, not only is it a scandal between a single woman and a married man, but it's a single woman and two brothers that are married.
One of them is the president of the United States.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, I feel like I asked kind of an obvious question. Why are people interested in this?
No, well,
I mean, I think that's definitely one part of it. I think.
Right.
I mean, when I got to that part of, right, is it Anthony Summers? Because I know you do quote from, or you looked at his biography.
Oh, yes, I read it and I thought it was very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because from 1982, right, when her case is reopened.
Right.
Yeah. He starts to get this, he starts to look through all of the like interviews, and he conducts the interviews. He like tries to contact everyone who was in Marilyn's Rolodex. Right.
Yeah. I actually kind of want to go back and look at that biography again, especially like it, you know, in terms of like background for watching the new Netflix show on her, because you know that stuff is kind of interesting. It makes you think, like, because it kind of indicates, did someone probably thought that, or some people probably thought that Marilyn was dangerous in some kind of way. And there's the part of it, like maybe she knew some secrets or something like that. But the way that I kind of like to see it is, you know, we were talking earlier about how even today, but especially back then, you know, the studio system and society in general likes to put women into boxes. I think that the very fact that she did go to New York, even though she came back and struck out on her own and really proved to be so much more intelligent than anyone gave her credit for. I think that in itself made her kind of dangerous. You know, the fact that she was not, you know, once you got to know her, you realize that she was not easily put into like a label or a box or something like that. So you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I think something that I've started to find out more, just maybe from this documentary, from of course your book too, she was so nuanced in politics. She was actually more progressive than the Kennedys by far, with her understanding of, you know, what we would now call the LGBTQ community, with feminist issues. She was very progressive. And I think that, like you're saying, was a threat too, because she wasn't going to be silenced. And that's dangerous with a studio system that wants to box you in, kind of like what we've seen with Paris Hilton in a way, that people are surprised that she really understood her influencing strategy. And it's
Right.
like, well,
Right.
why do you think they get to where they do? Like there's thought behind this.
There's right. There's like active brain activity going on, you know. And
Yeah.
that, I think that sometimes people don't like that. They don't like to see that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, it's so they don't want to see it.
Yeah. I will say I felt dirty listening to the Kennedy episodes in the documentary, because I felt for Marilyn, like was she tapped privately in her bedroom? And I'm like, this is just so scandalous and uncomfortable. And if she was, that's an invasion of her privacy. Why was this allowed? Like, those are the questions I have.
Right. You mean
Mhm.
like why, how was that allowed, you know, not in terms of like Netflix coming out with the tapes, but how
No,
was it allowed to happen?
yeah. How is it allowed to happen in the
Right.
first place?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And that is really, that's frightening to think about, you know, on so many levels, especially because I think, you know, I and at this point, not you can't say every American thinks that JFK was great or saint or something, but there still remains that whole Camelot thing, you know, behind him. And then when you, like, you know, you just said you felt dirty. It was upsetting to how did this happen to her? How was that allowed to happen? It
Yeah.
really shows like a dark underbelly of, you know, her life unfortunately reveals the dark underbelly of Hollywood, and maybe the later part reveals the same thing about politics.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But is it true that Marilyn Monroe Productions was the first female owned production company, or?
Mary Pickford was the first
Okay.
to
Okay.
start her own production
Okay.
company.
Okay.
Marilyn was the second after her. And of course,
Wow.
Mary Pickford was decades before Marilyn.
Yeah. But I mean, to me, that's such a legacy of Marilyn Monroe. And, you know, like now we look at Reese Witherspoon, who has a really successful
Right.
Hello Sunshine is her production company.
Yes. And
And
they've done great projects, I think.
yes. And Reese Witherspoon has her book club, and like
Yes.
those get pitched for her production company. And I think, right, would we have Reese Witherspoon's kind of understanding? I'm curious, does she turn to Marilyn Monroe? I mean, there's so much legacy.
I'd be very curious about
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Mhm.
she was, I mean, I think that Marilyn was a trailblazer in so many ways, but I kind of think that she would have gone into directing possibly and producing. And I have this sense that she would have been such a good director. It's just something I've kind of thought about.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Definitely. And it would be interesting, you know, if you could just rewrite time and like, you know, have her live for another
Right.
10 years and just, you know, be like, okay, Marilyn, direct this.
See what
Go.
she does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
now I'm going to let you in on a contact we've interviewed, Jan Balakian, who's a good friend of mine, who's an Arthur Miller scholar. And Jan just came out with a new play, so we were interviewing her about that. But I've asked Jan a lot about the Arthur Miller Marilyn Monroe connection, because Jan got to interview Arthur Miller at the end of his life in Connecticut,
Oh,
in his
wow.
country home, you know,
Yes.
where Marilyn Monroe would have gone to. And well, she said she didn't bring it up because she thought it was really it was a topic Arthur Miller didn't like to talk about,
Right.
which I can understand.
Right.
But there is something that strikes me about Arthur Miller, which, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Elizabeth, you're the biographer here, but it seems like he kind of thought she was extremely naive and she had this knowledge, but he needed to cultivate it for her. And I've kind of always felt uncomfortable about this, like, teacher
I feel exactly
relationship.
the same way.
Yeah.
I feel exactly the same way about her relationship with him and how I think he might have seen her. You're right. I sort of imagine Arthur Miller did not think Marilyn Monroe was stupid or unintelligent at all. I think that's obvious. But it's almost as if he saw in her, like, he saw this like raw material kind of. You know what I mean? To
Mhm.
sort of, like you said, cultivate that needed someone to tend to it, to educate it, to mold it
Mhm.
almost. Even though she was younger than him, but she was in her late 20s, she was an adult. And she was already very, very well read by the time she met Arthur Miller. It's not as if she hadn't read it all and he was introducing her to all these books and things like that. That wasn't the case. I mean, I'm sure like any couple where they're both very literary, they probably introduced each other to different writers and things like that. So, but for some reason, I just think he saw her as, like you said, naive and like this tiny little bud of a flower that needed tending to, instead of a fully formed woman who was already, even though she didn't have formal education, very well educated.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's
And
that's kind of an uncomfortable dynamic in relationships.
Mhm.
I don't think
Yeah.
it's a good one.
yeah. Almost like she's a blank canvas, and that's
Exactly.
yeah, like where is her agency? But I feel like any of her relationships, that's the question I've always asked is where was her agency? Like, did they let Marilyn be
In
Marilyn?
romantic relationships.
In romantic.
Do you mean?
Mhm. Yes.
None of her official I don't think that Marilyn Monroe had any I think that, how do I say this? And this is me relating to, I can't write about anyone that I don't relate to on some level, because I feel like it just wouldn't work. And maybe this is me inviting myself into Marilyn Monroe's brain, but I think that Marilyn found it very, very difficult to have her own agency in her romantic relationships with men. I think that sometimes the types of men that that gravitated to her were the types of men that liked to see her as a blank canvas or had some control issues or things like that. And I think that also, just in general, it was hard for her to have agency around men. But the exception is, going back to Milton Greene. This is my theory, and I know Milton Greene was engaged to Amy Greene when he met Marilyn, and then by the time she came to New York, he was married, happily married. But I maintain that Milton was the love of Marilyn's life, and I think that they should have that had they ended up together, because it was really Arthur Miller who made Marilyn choose. Arthur said in 1956, "Look, it's Milton or it's me."
Mhm.
And that was such a pivotal moment in her time. I think it was just like really heartbreaking. I think that Milton was the only man and there was a romantic frisson sort of there. I think that was the man that she did feel like she was an equal to, that she had agency around, and he gave her that breathing room and saw her as a creative equal and loved the types of things that she came up with. But that's just me. That's just my theory.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, again, and this is from reading your novel and seeing this relationship, because it wasn't just that, it wasn't just surface physical, and it wasn't just, oh, you're really smart, I'm really smart. Like you said, like she definitely felt like he was an equal to her, which at the time I'm sure no one was giving her. I mean, even briefly
Absolutely.
when you talk about her marriage or her separation and sort of like continuance of like hanging out with Joe DiMaggio, like there was always that air of like, why does it feel like he's in charge?
Mhm.
Yes, right.
Like, you're not together. Why do I feel like you have this like chokehold on her life? Like, please go.
Right, exactly. I think that it was a similar dynamic in a different way. And even though Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller were very, very different people, I think that there a similar dynamic in some ways began to unfold in her relationship with Arthur. And it's so different when you look at a relationship with Milton. It's just so different.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Milton Greene came into Marilyn's life at a time where she was really losing faith in the world and even herself. Like she was at a point where she she knew what she was capable of, but she just didn't think it could even happen. So that was making her lose hope. And then Milton Greene came in, and they kind of gave each other hope. And it was such a beautiful thing, a beautiful relationship. I feel like I could write another book on their relationship. It's so endlessly fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I also loved her relationship with Amy,
Mhm.
or Amy's or and vice versa.
Yes.
I also didn't realize she didn't, because when I even like in the pictures that I've seen her where she's not in her pinup stuff, I'm like, oh, she looks cute. But at the time, I guess those clothes were unfashionable. So like in a way, it was a little jarring for me to be like, wait a minute, there was a time in Marilyn Monroe's life where she was not a fashion icon. Like I am very confused here.
Right. There was, I think that if you look at Marilyn's life in terms of like collections of moments, most of her, the clothes that people think of her wearing, she didn't even own those clothes. She would just borrow them because Marilyn wasn't interested in like, red carpet fashion. That wasn't the type of thing or fashion in terms of what's trendy and what's not. She had certain things that she absolutely loved, like she loves simple things like black leotards, and she loved her perfume and a few things like that. But the world of fashion didn't really interest her at all. Basically, she sort of needed to be helped in that way, and that's what Amy Greene was helping Marilyn with when she first came to Connecticut. She took her shopping, and Amy knew so much more about fashion than Marilyn did.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so interesting because like everything you've been talking about, Elizabeth, is really this machine of Hollywood that like, and I think that's how Hollywood still is in a way, is like the people who are part of this system, who are the, faces, the actors, don't always agree with what they're doing, like don't always wear those things, like, but they become someone to look up to for the general public. And
Right.
and that's a really tough negotiation when you want to try to have control over your identity. And you kind of have to fit these boxes of how you sell in a film, or
Oh, absolutely. It's right. It's like this, it still seems to have this formulaic thing. Like, this is what we're going to fit you into. This is like the little twist or the bait or the thing that makes you zeitgeisty right now. And this is what you're going to wear to go along with it. And these are the roles that you're going to take to go along with it. Even if there's not a studio mogul, some old man breathing down your neck telling you do this or else you're going to be squashed. There's the pressure to do that because you're, that the idea that you won't be successful unless you do that your projects won't be successful unless you conform to you've got options to conform into, but you've got to pick one of those options, like that sort of thing. And I think that still is very, very real in Hollywood. Maybe perhaps now more than in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I kind of wonder what Marilyn would think of how she's been imagined, especially in the Smash series, that like there's going to be a musical of her. Like they're going to expand that musical for Broadway soon. So like, I'm curious about what your thought is of how, because right, that's where the theatrical and Hollywood are meeting in a way. Like literally Marilyn's New York City and Marilyn's LA are in that musical. So
I actually haven't seen that. So what do you, have you guys seen it? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, I really liked when they imagined the Marilyn Monroe musical, just because there are numbers of like her conflicted feelings about the Hollywood industry. And there's like this whole song about like 20th Century Fox, and she's just like passed from one man to another, like about
wow, okay,
what to do, how to act. And then there is a whole number about the Actors Studio and Stanislavski and the method. And like, I imagine
great.
Marilyn more. Yeah, no, I think it's actually pretty nuanced. The only thing is there is no
sounds like
Milton
something
Greene.
Marilyn would be happy about if it was happening, because I think that she would want that story to be told, that how she felt during those during those years in Hollywood. I mean, I imagine that everybody wants to be heard, and she wanted to be heard too.
Yeah. The only thing is I hope they add Milton Greene, just because
Oh my
they rely
gosh,
a lot
yeah.
on DiMaggio, and mostly
Right.
DiMaggio. And yeah, there's not a lot of Arthur Miller, but I'm sure they will, because like the way they did it in the TV series, it was only like a 40-minute musical. So
Oh
you
yeah.
know, but they should consult you, Elizabeth, as
Oh my gosh.
you know, the
Well, I'd be
biographer.
happy. Happy to be consulted about it.
Yeah.
Anyone's
Yeah.
listening. Yeah.
So like what, maybe like as we're wrapping up, what did you learn personally that you were surprised about while you were writing and poring over the material to document this time in Marilyn's life?
Let me think. Nothing really could surprise me about Marilyn Monroe. So I don't really know if I was there were maybe I was surprised on some way, although I shouldn't have been surprised. These moments of there was so much about her that's just so relatable. I think, like, for example, in my book, happens in March of 1955, where she's doing this circus thing and she's trying to get on the elephant, and during the costume fitting, she felt fat during the costume fitting, nothing was working. They were trying to put her in costumes that she didn't want. She had so many moments like that where she just felt like, oh gosh, there were when you plan for something and you're thinking, I'm going to make sure everything goes well. I'm going to make sure my hair looks great. I'm going to make sure that I'm well rested. I know what I'm doing. And then somehow it's just like, you get there and you're sweating and it all falls apart. There were so many moments like that in Marilyn's experience that I thought, like, wow, this is so, this is how I feel all the time, or things like that. And another thing that surprised me, but this is in a more sad way, was to find out that Arthur Miller was the reason why her friendship and partnership with Milton Greene ended. It was surprising to me that he would be so hostile towards Milton Greene. And I don't think he was that hostile in the beginning, but it escalated. And it was surprising that he would ask a woman who he loved and who he supposedly was supporting with her own creative projects, and who he wanted to support in the way you're supposed to support a partner to grow, would ask her to demand that she cut off contact with her best friend and creative collaborator, and cut him off from the Marilyn Monroe Productions, which was I think it was the beginning of the end for her in a lot of ways. So that was something that really struck me in my research, and it was very difficult for me to write about personally because it made me so sad.
Yeah. Well, Mary and I had a Marilyn Monroe episode in Atlantic City because I actually really loved the Claridge Hotel where she stayed when she was in charge of the Miss America pageant, leading Miss America, or in that parade. And like those images, I see this light in Marilyn's eyes, like this happiness of, like, just you can really tell, like even the image on your cover of her leaning
Yes.
over the hotel, of just excitement and euphoria of being content. But you're right.
Yes.
It's when
that's such a great image,
yeah.
Such a great feeling, because we all know that feeling, right? And it's kind of the best feeling in the world when those moments happen.
Yeah. But it really is, in my opinion, when they're trying, you can really tell when she's trying to be fit into the stereotype. And it's heartbreaking, but I think you really show us this lesson of living your authentic self, but like not trying to not let people define your narrative. But it can be very tough, of a balance.
It really can be. Yeah. Oh wait, you were talking about your Marilyn moment at the hotel.
Oh yes.
Yes.
So I mean,
I'm
Mary,
curious.
Mary can explain, like, right, Mary, what did you see at the hotel?
Well, I mean, it was, first of all, it was like a ghost town, but I mean, we were
Yeah.
still kind of, well, we're coming out of the pandemic. So I guess, like, that's just how it was. But like, it almost felt like a ghost town because there was like this one little old man in a wheelchair, like yelling. And I was like, wait a minute, is he real? Or is he a ghost? Like, what is happening? But the one area has all of these pictures of her with the Miss America pageant and things like that. And just the architecture, I'm assuming is still the same from back then. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And to just know that she was there was like,
Yeah, because she
Oh my
stayed in
gosh,
the
I'd love to see
penthouse.
it.
Yeah, you should, because at the rooftop bar, the staff pointed me to the penthouse, which is on the rooftop of the bar outside. And that's also where Frank Sinatra stayed. But like thinking of
Oh,
Marilyn
right.
Monroe there, like just such history. And yeah, I think there's so much you teach us in your book that are lessons of seeing people as agentic, empowered people who have an identity that, you can't craft them into the image you have of them. And for me,
Yes.
unfortunately, that's what happened with Marilyn is a lot of men were trying to craft her into their fantasy of, which was her power on the screen, was the fantasy of her
Yes.
femininity, but she wasn't the fantasy in real life.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. I think that's why it was very difficult for her to reconcile in her life, because that false image of her was what was sort of like galvanized her career. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think,
Thank you so much for saying that about my book. That was one of the best compliments I could have. So thank you.
no, your book is so wonderful. So, you know, are you working on something we should all, be ready for, Elizabeth?
Oh, wow. So I've been working on something for a while, and it's a book. It's a nonfiction book,
Oh,
and it's called Parachute Women, and it's about some of the women who were involved with the band the Rolling Stones during the late 60s and the early 70s, like Anita Pallenberg, Marianne Faithfull, Marsha Hunt, Bianca Jagger, and sort of their influence on late 60s, early 70s rock culture. So that's what I've been working on. And that book is such a bigger scope than my Marilyn book. So it was really quite a challenge to work on.
yeah.
But that's what's next.
Do you have a date for like when you think it'll probably hit bookshelves?
Probably early next year.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, wonderful. Well, definitely, Elizabeth, you are welcome back with Parachute Women.
Thank you.
And even, reach out to us after you see this new Netflix documentary. And
Oh, I will. I'm
like,
super curious.
yeah,
about it. I'll watch it soon.
Yeah, we might have to invite you back on.
Oh, I'd love to.
Give
I'd
us
love to come back on.
give us your thoughts, like since you're so close,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah. I'm really curious about it now.
yeah, maybe you can see like the Bombshell musical on the Smash TV series. We'll have to like talk about Marilyn in the media.
Yeah, continue the conversation because it's a whole different one and one that's really, expansive, I think.
Yeah. And I think we can't let you go without asking, what movie of Marilyn's do you turn to a lot?
I have two movies that I turn to a lot. And one of them, it's probably the most, is Some Like It Hot, because I just think that she's so funny in that film. I think that Jack Lemmon is so funny in that film. And it's always a movie that I go to when I'm kind of feeling down. Because it's just there's something about like the liveliness of the comedy that just pulls me out of whatever cloudy state that I'm in. And one of my other favorites is Bus Stop. There's something so magical about that film. And it also, it was a film that she was so proud of. And I kind of love that, like, sort of, I'm so East Coast that I find the West as this mythical place that may or may not even exist, so it's interesting for me to watch her in that setting and with the cowboys and stuff. And also she and Milton Greene worked so hard on creating that character. So Bus Stop is a big one for me too.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, we all need to, take Elizabeth's suggestions. I need to see Bus Stop. Okay. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. This is just,
oh my gosh, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Wonderful. No, we learned so much, and we can't
so
wait.
Did I.
Well, this is why it's so wonderful to like bring us all together, and I can't wait for your new book.
Thank you.
Yeah. I love the way that your mind goes into these counter, or not counter, but like what is also happening.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's always kind of what I'm thinking about. I'm sort of not thinking about the main thing. I'm off in the subtlety of something else, So it's nice. It's great to hear that you appreciate that.
Yeah, I like the under the surface, what's going on behind the scenes. Yeah. So thank you. And Mary, thanks for being a co-host.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah. And thank you, listeners. And, make sure that you get your hands on Marilyn in Manhattan, which people are already saying they're getting your book, even knowing that you're coming on. So.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this Ivory Tower Boiler Room or True Crime in Academia episode. You can watch our video versions of our episodes on patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Join at the price of an iced coffee, or join as an Ivory Tower member and get some of our exclusive merchandise. I could not be here without an amazing team. So I'm Andrew Rimby, the executive director, and I am joined with Mary DePippi, our chief contributor, who hosts True Crime in Academia. It comes out on Tuesdays. Jaron Usta is our marketing director, and our two interns are Nicole Arguello and Kimberly Dallas. And I'm actually here with Mary. So Mary, where can they follow us on social media?
You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Ivory Tower Boiler Room. On Twitter, we are at Ivory Boiler Room. And then just search the Ivory Tower Boiler Room on Facebook, and you can like our page there.
Wonderful. And we, Mary and I, and the whole team hope you all are healthy and happy. And we can't wait to join you and have you all join us in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
We're having a heat wave. I try